Associated Press, the news cooperative that informed America. In the spring of 1846, 6 New York newspaper publishers gathered in a dimly lit office, facing a problem that was bleeding their businesses dry. The Mexican-American War was raging, California gold was calling to adventurers, and European revolutions were reshaping the world, but getting news from these distant places was bankruptingly expensive. Each newspaper was paying astronomical fees to relay riders, telegraph operators, and steamship messengers to bring back the same stories their competitors were also desperately seeking. David Hale of the Journal of Commerce, James Watson Webb of the Morning Courier and New York Inquirer, and their fellow publishers realized they were locked in a destructive arms race that was enriching everyone except themselves. Their revolutionary solution was elegantly simple. Instead of competing to gather the same news, why not cooperate? They would pool their resources, share the costs, and distribute identical reports to all members. On May 12, 1846, these 6 rivals signed an agreement creating the New York Associated Press, a news-gathering cooperative that would inadvertently become the world's oldest and largest news organization. What began as a cost-cutting measure among competitors evolved into an empire that would shape how humanity receives information for the next century and 3/4. The timing of the Associated Press launch coincided perfectly with America's communication revolution. The first telegraph line between New York and Washington had opened just 2 years earlier, and Samuel Morse's invention was rapidly spreading across the continent like electronic veins. The AP's founding members immediately grasped telegraphy's transformative potential, hiring operators to transmit news at lightning speed compared to the horse and rider system that had dominated for centuries. By 1848, the cooperative had established its first international connection, partnering with European agencies to bring foreign news across the Atlantic via steamship, then distributing it nationwide through telegraph wires. The California Gold Rush of 1849 provided the AP's first major test, as hundreds of newspapers outside New York clamored for reliable reports from the goldfields. The cooperative responded by expanding beyond its original 6 members, selling news services to papers across America while maintaining strict editorial standards that distinguish professional journalism from rumor and speculation. This expansion strategy proved brilliantly profitable because the marginal cost of distributing news to additional papers was minimal once the core gathering infrastructure existed. By 1851, the Associated Press had effectively created America's first information monopoly, controlling the flow of national and international news to thousands of local papers that couldn't afford their own correspondent networks. The Civil War transformed the Associated Press from a business convenience into a national necessity. When Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in April 1861, AP correspondent Lawrence Gobright was positioned to transmit the first reports of America's greatest crisis. The cooperative deployed dozens of correspondents to follow Union and Confederate armies, creating the first systematic war reporting network in American history. The AP's commitment to factual accuracy over sensationalism established credibility with military leaders and government officials who began treating the agency as a semi-official information channel. President Abraham Lincoln reportedly read AP dispatches before receiving formal military reports, and Confederate leaders simultaneously relied on and denounced AP coverage depending on whether it favored their cause. The war years proved that timely, accurate news reporting wasn't merely a commercial product, but a democratic necessity, and the Associated Press positioned itself as democracy's information infrastructure. By 1865, the cooperative employed over 300 correspondents and had established bureaus in every major American city, generating annual revenues exceeding $1 million. The war's end brought new challenges as the AP expanded westward with railroad construction, establishing bureaus in frontier towns that often had telegraph offices before they had churches or schools. The late 19th century witnessed the Associated Press evolving into a global information empire through strategic international partnerships and technological innovation. The completion of the first transatlantic telegraph cable in 1866 revolutionized international news gathering, allowing the AP to transmit European reports to American papers within hours instead of weeks. The cooperative formed exclusive partnerships with Reuters in Britain, Havas in France, and Wolf in Germany, creating a cartel that controlled global news distribution for decades.
This arrangement meant that American newspapers received European news filtered through the AP's editorial judgment, giving the Cooperative enormous influence over how Americans understood international events. The 1882 reorganization transformed the New York Associated Press into a corporation, solidifying its control over American news distribution while establishing standardized reporting practices that would define professional journalism. The AP developed the inverted pyramid writing style, presenting the most important information first because telegraph transmission was expensive and unreliable, making concise, front-loaded reporting economically essential. By 1900, the Associated Press served over 2,000 newspapers across America, employed 500 full-time correspondents worldwide, and generated annual revenues exceeding $3 million. The Cooperative's success attracted imitators and competitors, but none could match the AP's combination of comprehensive coverage, editorial credibility, and cost efficiency. The 20th century's opening decades brought existential challenges that forced the Associated Press to defend its monopolistic practices in court while adapting to new communication technologies. The 1900 to 1918 period saw intense legal battles as excluded newspapers sued for access to AP services, arguing the Cooperative's membership restrictions violated antitrust laws. The landmark 1945 Supreme Court case Associated Press v. United States ultimately forced the AP to abandon exclusive territorial arrangements and accept all qualified applicants, fundamentally changing its business model from a closed cooperative to an open service provider. World War I demonstrated the AP's global reach when the agency's 200 correspondents provided comprehensive coverage from European battlefields, Russian Revolution sites, and diplomatic conferences. The war years also highlighted the tension between the AP's commitment to neutrality and the American government's desire for favorable coverage, with federal officials occasionally pressuring the agency to suppress or modify reports deemed harmful to national morale. The introduction of radio broadcasting in the 1920s initially threatened the AP's business model, as radio stations could deliver news faster than newspapers. But the Cooperative adapted by licensing content to broadcasters and establishing AP Radio in 1974. The Great Depression paradoxically strengthened the AP's position, as struggling newspapers couldn't afford independent news gathering and increasingly relied on the Cooperative's cost-effective services. By 1940, the Associated Press served 1,400 newspapers and 900 radio stations worldwide, employed over 2,000 journalists, and maintained bureaus in 70 countries.
World War II elevated the Associated Press to unprecedented global prominence as the agency's correspondents documented humanity's greatest conflict across 6 continents. The AP deployed over 400 war correspondents, more than any other news organization in history, covering everything from Pearl Harbor's aftermath to concentration camp liberations. The Cooperative's reporting from D-Day, where AP correspondent Don Whitehead landed with the first assault waves, exemplified the agency's commitment to first-hand coverage regardless of personal risk to its journalists. The war years saw 37 AP correspondents killed in action, a casualty rate that underscored the dangerous nature of frontline journalism, but also enhanced the agency's credibility and prestige. The AP's global network proved invaluable for coordinating Allied information efforts, though the agency maintained editorial independence from government propaganda efforts. The introduction of wire photo technology in 1935 had already transformed news presentation, but World War II proved the power of visual journalism, as AP photographers like Joe Rosenthal captured iconic images such as the flag raising at Iwo Jima. Post-war reconstruction found the Associated Press establishing bureaus in dozens of newly independent nations, positioning the agency to cover decolonization movements across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. By 1950, the AP served 3,500 subscribers worldwide, transmitted 250,000 words daily, and employed 3,000 journalists, making it the largest news-gathering organization in human history. The Cold War era forced the Associated Press to navigate unprecedented challenges as competing ideologies battled for global influence, and information became weaponized by both superpowers. The AP's commitment to factual reporting often conflicted with American government desires for favorable coverage during crises like the Korean War, Hungarian Revolution, and Cuban Missile Crisis. The agency established bureaus in Moscow and Beijing despite intense political pressure, maintaining that comprehensive global coverage required presence in communist capitals, regardless of ideological differences.
The 1960s brought new technological revolutions as television emerged as America's dominant news medium, forcing the AP to adapt by establishing AP Television News in 1994 to serve broadcast clients. The Vietnam War marked a turning point in the relationship between the Associated Press and the American government, as AP correspondents like Malcolm Brown and Peter Arnett reported extensively on military setbacks and civilian casualties, contradicting official optimistic assessments. The agency's unflinching coverage of events like the My Lai massacre and the Tet Offensive contributed to growing public skepticism about government credibility and marked the end of the era when news organizations automatically deferred to official sources. The introduction of satellite communication in the 1960s revolutionized international news gathering, allowing the AP to transmit reports, photos, and eventually video footage instantaneously from anywhere on Earth. By 1975, the Associated Press served 8,500 subscribers in 115 countries, maintained 230 bureaus worldwide, and employed 5,000 journalists covering every time zone around the clock. The digital revolution of the 1980s and 1990s presented the Associated Press with its greatest existential challenge since the advent of radio, as computer networks and eventually the internet democratized information distribution and threatened traditional media business models. The AP responded by embracing digital technology early, launching AP Digital in 1996 to serve online publications and developing multimedia content packages combining text, photos, audio, and video for web-based clients. The agency's investment in digital infrastructure proved prescient as traditional newspaper circulation declined throughout the 1990s and 2000s, forcing the AP to diversify beyond its historical print media base. The September 11th terrorist attacks demonstrated the continued relevance of professional journalism as AP correspondents provided comprehensive coverage of the unfolding crisis, while amateur bloggers and social media users spread misinformation and speculation. The Iraq and Afghanistan wars saw the AP adapting to embedded journalism while maintaining editorial independence, with the agency's reporters providing critical coverage of both military operations and their civilian consequences. The rise of social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook initially threatened to bypass traditional news organizations entirely, but the AP adapted by partnering with tech companies to provide fact-checking services and verified content for social media users. The 2008 financial crisis devastated newspaper industry revenues, forcing many AP member newspapers to close or drastically reduce operations, but the Cooperative's diversified client base, including broadcasters, websites, and international media, helped stabilize revenues. By 2010, the Associated Press served 15,000 subscribers worldwide, maintained bureaus in 120 countries, employed 4,000 journalists, and generated annual revenues approaching $600 million despite the challenging media landscape. The smartphone era and social media explosion of the 2010s forced the Associated Press to fundamentally reimagine its role in an information ecosystem where anyone with a mobile phone could potentially break news faster than professional journalists. The Arab Spring uprisings demonstrated both the power and limitations of citizen journalism, as social media provided real-time updates from protest sites but also spread false information and propaganda that required professional verification. The AP responded by developing sophisticated fact-checking operations and partnering with Facebook, Google, and other platforms to combat misinformation while adapting its content for mobile consumption and social media sharing. The agency's investment in artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies enabled automated transcription, translation, and even basic news writing for routine stories like corporate earnings reports and sports scores. The Trump presidency and rise of fake news accusations paradoxically benefited established news organizations like the AP as audiences increasingly sought credible sources amid information chaos and political polarization. The COVID-19 pandemic beginning in 2020 highlighted the continued necessity of professional journalism as the AP's global network provided comprehensive coverage of the virus's spread while combating dangerous misinformation about treatments and vaccines. The agency's adaptation to remote work and digital-first publishing during the pandemic accelerated technological changes that had been developing for years.
Today, the Associated Press operates as a nonprofit cooperative serving over 15,000 subscribers worldwide, employing 3,000 journalists in 250 locations across 100 countries, and distributing content to an estimated global audience exceeding 1 billion people daily.
The Associated Press empire stands as perhaps the most successful media cooperative in history, having survived and thrived through 8 major technological disruptions from telegraphy to artificial intelligence while maintaining its core mission of providing accurate, unbiased news reporting. The organization's transformation from 6 competing New York newspapers' cost-cutting measure into a global information infrastructure demonstrates how cooperative business models can succeed when properly structured around shared needs and mutual benefits. The AP's influence on American and global journalism extends far beyond its direct subscriber base, as the agency's editorial standards, writing style, and ethical guidelines became industry standards adopted by news organizations worldwide. The Cooperative's commitment to factual accuracy over sensationalism, evident from its Civil War coverage through today's fact-checking operations, established professional journalism as a distinct discipline separate from entertainment or advocacy. The Associated Press weathered challenges that destroyed countless competitors by maintaining editorial credibility, technological adaptability, and operational efficiency, while serving the democratic function of keeping citizens informed about their world. The agency's evolution from a Telegraph-era startup to a multimedia global enterprise proves that organizations can maintain their core values while embracing radical technological change when survival demands innovation. As artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and other emerging technologies reshape media consumption, the Associated Press continues adapting while preserving the cooperative principles that enabled 6 rival newspaper publishers to build an information empire that has informed America and the world for nearly 2 centuries.